So things are sort of out of order here. Usually I say these words, and then you hear news, and then you hear a show. I've already recorded the show with Paul Winter. I just finished it a few minutes ago, and I'm talking now. I know this is very complicated, but I just want to be able to tell you that because I already know what this show is, and I know what kind of person Paul Winter is anyway, and he is a remarkable individual. He has played all over the world with all kinds of people and with an awful lot of non-human animals. He's somebody I've always felt a very strong connection with over the years. And so we just sat down and talked about a lot of different stuff, and you're going to hear some of his amazing music, and just sit back, enjoy, and set your worries aside. That is from 1963, the Paul Winter Sextet. Paul Winter is sitting right here with me today. A lot of time has passed. Paul and I have known each other, at least I remember meeting Paul at his barn in Litchfield sometime in the early 1980s. We've seen each other many times after that. He's been on this show quite a few times, or at least this is his third or fourth time. Do I need to tell you who Paul Winter is? He's a 7-time Grammy Award-winning musician. He's a saxophonist, composer, bandleader of the Paul Winter Consort. He has a new album, Horn of Plenty. He's got some dates coming up that we'll tell you about. He is the person who has presided all these years over the solstice concerts at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. In fact, if I just sat here trying to tell you who Paul Winter is, the show would be over eventually, and he wouldn't have spoken. So let's stop with that. Paul, I want to take you back even further into the past to when you are 5 years old. You're in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and you go to see with your parents, I think, some kind of Shriners concert gig, and explain what happened that night.
It was a Shriners dance at a place called the Jaffa Mosque in Altoona, my hometown. It's an amazing big building that they had created in the 1920s, the Shriners had. In any case, this was a dance of some kind, and my parents parked me behind the drummer while they danced, and I was on a little seat there behind this guy, and I was completely mesmerized when he's playing something with each foot and his hands. I'd never seen a drum set before. But the thing I remember most about that evening was when that music was played, and this was a dance, a 5-piece combo playing standard songs this is 1945. When that music was played, people seemed to behave more congenially with each other out there dancing. I mean, there was much more smiling going on than usual when people are doing their workaday routines. And that fact of how music could affect people stayed with me till now. I think I was really saw my destiny that night without knowing it.
Well, I think the other thing that happens in a situation like that is bringing people together. And everybody on the dance floor, they may have had an argument earlier in the day, or somebody may have gotten somebody else's parking space. But that's all kind of gone, I think, once the music starts.
I agree.
And you kind of continue that. I mean, if there's, one of your many legacies is kind of erasing a lot of boundaries, getting a lot of different kind of people together to play. And they might come from different genres, they might come from different countries, but there's just some kind of common tongue that you all wind up speaking.
The joining force that music has, it continues to amaze me more and more. And I feel that the ear may be the salvation for our wayward species.
Well, I should say that Paul, I hope I'm allowed to say this, is 86 years old. I met him in the parking lot. He drove his Subaru out back here, wouldn't let me carry the box up for him. So this has kept you very young. And I want to talk a little bit also about what happens after that. You wind up taking I think, music lessons on a number of different instruments. You haven't found the sax exactly yet, but you do eventually discover the saxophone. And here's how, if you're ever in a trivia contest and somebody says, what do Paul Winter and Elvis Presley have in common? The correct answer is Anne Margaret, right? Anne Margaret sang with your band, right?
She was a fellow student at Northwestern, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she was only there 1 year,
yeah.
And then took a trip to Las Vegas and met George Burns. And the next thing we knew, she was the star of the Grammy show and on the cover of Life magazine.
But things started to move pretty fast for you, too. I mean, you wind up doing a lot of touring. You wind up going, and in a pretty short span of years, right? You become more international. You play Jackie Kennedy has you come to the White House. Tell us about that.
That was a result of our State Department tour in early 1962, which had come about because we had won a collegiate jazz festival in the year before. And the State Department, I think, we suggested to them that they consider sending a student group on a goodwill tour, which they had never done. It was really at the height of the period of the Jazz Ambassadors program that the State Department had started in 1956, actually under Eisenhower. And in any case, the State Department loved the idea we presented. I think a big factor in it was that we were a perfectly integrated band with 3 blacks and 3 whites at a time when civil rights was the burning issue in our country. And so after 6 months in Latin America and 160 concerts, all of which went quite well, we came back to no work whatsoever. Nobody in here had heard about the tour except one place that did was the White House. And we got this inquiry from the First Lady about playing in her series of concerts, which were called Concerts for Young People by Young People, all classical. But they evidently thought, oh, maybe let's take a chance on a jazz group. Maybe these guys will be well behaved and not like a lot of the reputation jazz had then. And that's so on November 19th, 1962, we played in the East Room.
So another thing that starts happening pretty early on is that idea of breaking down borders, crossing borders with your music, and maybe even before you're starting to do it quite at the level you're doing it now. You participated in this program that I had never heard of called the Jazz Lift. Is that what it's called? Was it called? This thing where you send records?
Yes.
Yeah. Explain that.
In around 1958, I think my second year in college, I saw in Downbeat magazine an ad called Jazz Lift, Theodore Griever's International Private Detective, Battle Creek, Michigan. Send me your jazz albums and I'll smuggle them behind the Iron Curtain. I thought, what an amazing thing, because I had already heard a great deal about how jazz was so well loved in Russia and the Soviet Union. And I had the sense that actually they might like jazz better than we do. And so I sent a bunch of albums from my collection to him, and he had said, write your name and address on the back of each album, and you'll hear from people. And I did, and it was so amazing to get letters from people in Poland and Russia and saying, oh my gosh, thank you so much. We could never get this music here, and we love it, and it's our hope for freedom when we hear this music.
Which is very much what that Jazz Ambassadors concept was. In fact, Brubeck wrote a musical called, I think, The Real Ambassadors.
Exactly.
That it was about, I think, Louis Armstrong, and that whole idea that music becomes accessible to a different audience and then connects the two audiences together. Yes. So we have to say that you wanted to go over there earlier, but it's called the Iron Curtain for a reason. But in 86, you get over there, you're in, I think, Irkutsk, and this man comes up to you, and he doesn't really speak much English, and you don't speak much Russian, but he hands you something. Tell us that story.
Well, he handed me an envelope, and I looked at it, and then I recognized the writing on it. I opened it up, and it's a letter that I had written him in 1958 after he had gotten in touch with me and thanked me for an album I'd sent him.
25 years later.
Yeah, it was very moving. I really had tears in my eyes.
Yeah.
And we couldn't speak a word of each other's language, but that was enough just to have that letter.
Since we're sort of talking about Russia right now, we're going to play a song. It's called Russian Girls. And you do it with the Dmitry Pokrovsky singers, who you work with a lot. But what I like about this one is, on this song, I feel like we start with them, and then I'm making hand signals, which you will not be able to enjoy on the radio. I could just hear you coming towards them and them coming towards you. And, there's a way that the two sets of musicians are reaching towards each other on this song until they overlap.
Our last concert in our tour, 1986, our first tour of Russia, was at Moscow University. And a jazz writer named Leonid Pereversev, whom I'd met on my first trip there by myself in 1984, wanted us to meet this ensemble, the Dmitry Pokrovsky ensemble, 12 young men and women who had dedicated their lives to bringing back the ancient Russian village music. It was a completely different genre and everything than us, but he felt a great kinship between the two groups, and he got permission first for us to be the first Western group allowed into Moscow University and to do a concert together sponsored by the newly formed Moscow University Ecology Club. And to symbolize their mission, the idea they had for decorating the stage was to line the front of the stage with these huge cabbages. And so that was the context in which we played together on the first gig we ever did, and we completely loved this group, and their singing reminded me very much of the Bulgarian singers that we had heard in the early 60s from the Kutev ensemble. And at the end of that night, we all stayed up in somebody's apartment drinking vodka and waiting until we went at 8 a.m. to the airport to fly home. And I remember through the interpreter saying to Dmitry, boy, we would love it if we could come back and record with you sometime and maybe bring your ensemble to the States. And he smiled politely, but I knew that in his mind that was about as remote a possibility as going to the moon to play. And that all happened. Yeah. Because things opened up very, very quickly at that time. This is 1986, 87.
And they came to the cathedral, right?
4 times.
4 times, yeah. But what's so interesting here, too, is I'm not a good enough musicologist to really be able to say this, but I doubt the two sides are singing even in the same time, or singing or playing even in the same time signature. There's some way that this music is coming together, that seems kind of magical. Like it just shouldn't work, but it does.
Well, we just had the opportunity to hang out with them for 3 weeks in Moscow in 87. And speaking about license among jazz players that you and I have spoken about earlier, they had the same kind of an attitude about making music that we did. And even though that our backgrounds were totally different.
You've talked about your horn being a magic carpet that just got you to fly around the world. And it's interesting when you say that, too, because you're kind of personalizing your horn a little bit. And I was wondering about that for you. B.B. King always called his guitars Lucille. Every single guitar was named Lucille. And I don't know, is your horn not inanimate in a way? I mean, does it feel kind of alive for you? Is it a partner, or how do you think about the instrument you play?
What a wonderful question. It really is a partner. It's an extension of me. And it takes me a little while to have that resonance kind of be fully functioning. But in a concert, after maybe the second or third piece, it's there. And I just feel at one with the sounds that come out. And I think that that's the allurement that I had as a little kid, just the fun of producing sounds. And of course, as you grow, you have maybe a more specific idea of what you want the sound to be like. And in the early days with my jazz sextet, I wanted it to be very raw and intense, like the bebop players. Yeah. But going to Brazil shifted me totally. And when I heard João Gilberto sing with such gentle soul, and thought, wow, you don't have to be loud to be soulful, and you don't have to be intense.
Vou te contar, já não podem ver coisas que só o coração pode entender.
Something about my own nature, the aesthetic, maybe a more feminine side, let's say, that began to emerge when I was in Brazil, hearing music like instruments like cello and English horn had a big influence on me.
Yeah, I think the Brazilian music, too, it feels like it starts with the guitar somehow.
Yeah.
The guitar is the kind of primal voice. And so that's going to put you in a different place,
Yes.
I think, and make your horn sound different. You sent over a timeline today, and I burst out laughing at one point reading it because there was something in the timeline about how one time you substituted for Paul Desmond with Brubeck. And the reason I laughed was because, Desmond famously said that he wanted to sound like a dry martini. And he probably said it once, and then it's just like it's in his obit. I mean, it's everywhere.
Right.
And I was thinking about Paul Desmond and Paul Winter. Your horn has sounded like everything, basically. You've sounded like a wolf. You sounded like a thrush, And when you're saying the thing you just said about how really it kind of, the music led you to different sounds, even before you started doing the work with the animals, you were already just saying, what kind of sounds can I make with this instrument?
That's the gift of jazz.
Yeah.
That jazz kind of says yes to anything you'd like to try and anybody you'd like to play with. And the spirit of welcome was always the thing that I loved the most about the jazz groups that I heard and players I got to meet.
Yeah. And, your career, it's really, in some ways, this kind of unbroken line of trips around the sun and trips to different places. But if there are ways of kind of breaking it up or looking at watersheds, I would think that Icarus, that album, is in a way kind of a point of change or maybe a point where you just figured out some things. We should say you're working with the legendary Beatles producer, George Martin. You're up in Marblehead, Massachusetts recording. We'll talk a little bit about that environment too. But was there something that happened there that you just thought, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing for a while that's a little bit different from what I've done before?
Well, the studio context was really a huge shift. I mean, this was a rented beach house with a remote recording gear brought into the dining room, and we set up in the living room. And the schedule was to go to the beach every morning and have lunch and come in at 2 o'clock and start recording and work till 10. Mm-hmm. You just can't get more idyllic than that. But also with George, it was a big, big yes. We brought all kinds of notions to those sessions, and had no idea how he would respond. But he, I think one of the key reasons he agreed to produce us, having never heard of us at all, but the manager we were with who had a connection with him at that time, and he was totally fascinated with this group that had oboe in it, because he played oboe originally with the Sadler Wells Ballet before he was a record producer. And so he thought, well, this is interesting, a group with oboe and cello. I've never done anything quite like this. And it was really a wonderful kind of creative marriage.
Yeah, and we should say that this is one of the reasons that he was hearing that he was aware of that, was that the Consort, you had sort of at that point also adopted a different idea about what a band could be, right? That, the idea of a standard jazz sextet or something like that. This is going to be something beyond it. The word, I think, comes to us from Elizabethan music, and you wanted to do a different kind of thing with what the ensemble was. Is there a way you can describe that?
I wanted it to be kind of at the same balance as a big band, in a way, giving each player an opportunity to solo, but the ensemble was really the main focus, and also to have these instruments that were the lesser known. They're lesser known in the jazz scene, the cello and the oboe, integrated into an ensemble, and played with the kind of personal voice that jazz players do, as opposed to, let's say, the usual symphonic approach to those instruments.
We're talking to Paul Winter right now. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about animals. I'm also going to give you a sense of where you can hear Paul over the next few weeks and months, because he's got a slightly different schedule this winter. All right, let's take a little break, and then we'll come back. So we're back. I'm in studio with Paul Winter, who is a legendary musician, but so much more, too. I want to, before we get back into the conversation, just tell you a little bit about where you can hear Paul this year. His touring schedule is a little bit different, and it's going to include, first of all, you're going to be taking the winter solstice celebration on the road, right? You're doing it in a lot of different places. I'll just run down them really quickly. December 6th, Great Hall in Needham, Massachusetts. December 13th, Cathedral of St. Paul in Burlington, Vermont. 17th, Cathedral of St. Luke, Portland, Maine. 19th, this is the one a lot of you will want to go to, Wolsey Hall, Yale University in New Haven. Also the 20th, St. James Place, Great Barrington. And then all the glorious spots of Western Massachusetts. Bombyx Center in Florence, Mass. On to Tarrytown Music Hall in New York on the 23rd. And then in Troy, New York on the 26th. That's happening, but you're also back at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine on Saturday, November 29th. And that is sort of to kick off this new album, Horn of Plenty, right?
Right.
So just say a little bit about what the concept is of Horn of Plenty.
A year ago, NPR asked us to do a special holiday program. Our winter solstice celebration had been broadcast for almost 30 years. In the years we were doing it, we had taken a hiatus from that production in 2020, when the pandemic began. In any case, they asked us to do this program. That's the first time we had done anything about Thanksgiving. And the title comes from the traditional symbol of Thanksgiving, the cornucopia, and which is symbolizes abundance, the harvest. And so the cornucopia is usually a wicker basket in the shape of an animal horn, and it's filled with fruits and vegetables and things. And I thought, well, I could, play off the pun of horn, and because I've always thought of my instrument as a horn, and talk about the plenty that is made possible for me musically, and also in terms of getting to know a little bit of the world.
Yeah, and we should say that also we're going to be airing the Paul Winter Horn of Plenty special, which is produced by NPR, on the Friday after Thanksgiving. That's November 28th, and then Paul will be performing at the Cathedral the following night. So before we get to animals, I want to follow up on what we were saying about Marblehead, because the first time I met you, I came as a fairly young reporter. It was in 1981. I came out to Litchfield, where you live and work in this marvelous place. And when I got there, it was clear. I think the other members of the consort were there, and there was like this really great vegetarian meal that was being made, and I was being welcomed in, and my plate was being filled, and I was thinking, this is just a real different feeling from what you would get in a typical situation where a band records in a studio or something like that. And it was really that Marblehead thing that made you think, yeah, I don't really want to do that anymore. I don't want to be Brian Wilson trying to get a whole bunch of people into a studio on some kind of clock. But talk a little bit. You decided how you wanted to work.
Actually, we stumbled into this opportunity with working with George Martin. And the lure for George was to have a 3-week vacation project where he brought his family over. They rented a house for George on the beach. And he came in and recorded with us each day. And there were no clocks to watch, no worry about the cost that was mounting up from the hours in the studio. It was unbridled. And I thought, this is the way I want to make music in the future. I don't care if I ever see another studio again.
I think the other thing you decided gradually, or maybe it just happened gradually, is that you wanted to work with the same people a lot. Some of the people that you're going to be performing with this winter are people you've been with for 25 years, or I guess maybe in the case of Eugene Friesen, even longer, right?
48.
48 years. I mean, that's kind of incredible, right?
It is.
It's a good thing neither one of you started dating Yoko, because it just wouldn't have worked out. But yeah, no, it's just that idea of these durable relationships is, I think, another big kind of priced into what you do. And because Teresa Thomason has been singing with you for a quarter of a century now.
Yes, she has.
Yeah. All right, so I want to talk about the animals. And usually when people talk to you about animals, it's the wolf, which is tremendous. And my dog enjoys it very much, listening to it. We put it on. And or it's the whales. Or, there's the cougar one is like really spooky. But I don't want to talk about those are sometimes referred to as charismatic fauna, because people just get excited about them. I want you to say a little bit about the well-tempered wood thrush. And the reason I want to do it is, first of all, a lot of people never see a wolf, but a lot of people, most people, this is a bird that, is out where you live. And I want you to say a little bit about your process here, about how you got to where you got. Because one of the things that started, I think, was you really started listening to how this bird sang. And you noticed, among other things, it was singing in a key.
Right. I had heard wood thrushes for years after I'd come to live in Northwest Connecticut and loved the fact that each one had their own signature song. As you go through the woods, every couple acres you hear a new one. And one June I heard this new song, a new arrival from probably Costa Rica, and I was so fascinated with it. I listened every morning and evening to hear it. It was very, very lovely. And as in most of the wood thrush songs, it's a signature song that he repeats again and again. And hearing the sound through the open windows of our cottage one morning, I went to the piano and found out he was singing in the key of C. So after that, was thinking of him as my C major wood thrush. And eventually, when I got a good recording of him, and this was over a period of 5 years, he came back in graced our woods, singing that same song in C major. And I began playing it on my horn, and I realized, wow, the four chords that are outlined by these four phrases of three notes each, are the same first four chords of the prelude to the Well-Tempered Clavier of Bach. It didn't stop there. It was also the first four chords of the equally famous prelude to the cello suites. So I decided that all of that correlation deserved a piece.
And so you did do that, and you do add what sounds like a clavier. I don't know what it actually is. Is it a synthesizer sounding like a?
Yeah.
It's
a synthesized forte piano, which is the instrument that would have been played in Bach's time.
Actually, I was noticing that you borrowed this from Gary Chapman, who I actually worked with one time on a Gershwin thing with the symphony.
Right.
Hanging around with him backstage is interesting, too.
It is.
He has a lot of interesting takes on the music. I learned a lot just, hanging around with him. I think that I like this example, too, because, it's not a charismatic fauna, but it's one of the things that I think we sometimes do. I know that I do this. I interviewed Robert McFarlane, the nature writer, not long ago, and I said to him, I notice sometimes I'm walking my dog out in Penwood State Forest, but I'm kind of just getting the walk done, I'm just getting the walk done, and I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about, or something I'm pissed off about from work or something, and I'm not listening and I'm not looking. And to me, one of the things that is happening here is you started by listening to the bird. And this is the bird the rest of us could hear, but we might be too busy, or we might be preoccupied or something. And that idea of connecting that way is really interesting, right?
It's the same as the allurement to jazz players as a kid. You hear something special, some certain soulfulness in somebody's playing. And with jazz players, you often find they have a signature sound. Mm. And I've always loved that, just been allured to unique sounds, whether it's a two-legged musician or otherwise.
I've noticed that when you do the kind of songwriting credits, like the songwriting credit on this one says Wood Thrush, Paul Winter, J.S. Bach. But with wolf eyes, it says Timberwolf, Paul Winter. So you credit these non-human animals as songwriters. And explain your philosophy there.
It's a symbolic statement of connectedness, of our relationship with these creatures. And to me, that's one of the hallmarks of this era. I say this era, I'm speaking about the last 80 years. of us reconnecting with creatures of this larger family of life that of which we were once a much more integral part. And that to me has been always very thrilling, a great source of optimism for me, even though things go in waves and we're backpedaling now in many ways with regard to the creatures. But I think there's something deep there that will stay with us. I mean, we found out that if you fell in the ocean and a whale is nearby, he's not going to swallow you.
Right.
We know that now.
Well, Gershwin knew that too. He said it ain't necessarily so. That idea that he made his home in that creature's abdomen. So, Robert McFarlane, he was on the show this year to talk about his latest book, which is, I think the title of it is a River Alive? And it's an interesting question. And, you've dealt with and you've made music with all of these living creatures. But I think one of the things we're beginning to think about, some of us anyway, as a species, is should we think of a river as being alive? Should we think of an old-growth forest as having some kind of group consciousness? And I know you've gotten more and more interested in, once again, not just non-human animals, but things like rivers and forests. I would say a little bit about how you see that. I mean, is a river a living thing to you?
It is, and I have to say that is one of the greatest books of our times. That's an amazing book that has a tremendous influence on me and on my daughter, who has a nonprofit that's involved very much with the rights of nature. And I totally agree with it. And somehow I think that if it were possible for us to really resonate with the fact of this great family of life of which we're part, that some transcendent kind of motivation could evolve that would be beyond religion, beyond politics, beyond all the things that seem to often divide us. And that the essence of this journey, this miracle journey that we're on in life, is relationship.
Yeah. I know. I think it's an amazing book. That and Underlands are both pretty amazing books.
Absolutely.
In this segment, one last thing I want to talk to you a little bit about, and that is how people react to this work. So about 21 years ago, I was up at Music Mountain, where you play a lot, and I wish I was sure I knew what song it was, but if it's possible that you were playing the Western Meadowlark song, song called Meadowlark, which is a bird, and it's a bird that has a somewhat endangered habitat, and I think that all got explained. And as you played that song, the woman next to me started to cry. And I'm sure that's a pretty common thing that happens with your audiences because, music can make us cry. It routinely does. This is a little something more. This is about sort of saying, oh, there's a connection you really hadn't maybe thought about that much. I don't know, maybe you could sort of say a little bit about what do audiences tell you about what this is doing? Because it is not like going to anybody else's concert. It just isn't.
I think a lot of our response to music has to do with memory. First of all, I think the memory of the ear is very much connected with the heart, as opposed to the memory of the eye, which we're so deluged with visual things that we don't remember, I don't think, that much of what we read and see. But the ear remembers, I think, much more reliably. So I think it touches people from something in their childhood, maybe a memory of a relationship with some pet or some creature. It's all kinds of, they're all over the map. I've several times had the comment from, and I think they've all been ladies, I don't know why, who said to me after the concert, well, Mr. Winter, I just want you to know my dog loves your music.
Absolutely. It's funny, my dog, Declan, we were in the park one day recently, and there was a hound there that we'd never seen before. And the hound, after it sort of gotten to know, they were sniffing around each other and everything, a couple other dogs around, the hound just cocked her head back and just howled. And Declan then cocks his head back. I've never heard him howl. He just started howling with this dog. It was kind of like, oh, you're doing that? I guess I'll try doing that too, which is kind of a Paul Winter moment.
Yeah, no, it is totally amazing, the allurement to howling that the canids have. And we don't know really why, we guess, but I'm happy with the mystery. I don't need to know why. I'm just glad that they do it, and that sometimes I get to do it with them.
I think the other thing that maybe I was hearing that particular night at Music Mountain was we think for a reason of these other animals as others. They're others.
Yeah.
That's that's a wood thrush. I'm not a wood thrush. That's a whale. I'm not a whale. But one of the things that goes on in these songs is you are suddenly hearing, and I think because this was an animal with an endangered habitat too, so this is also an animal whose vulnerability maybe you can hear and feel through the music. And it's not an other. It's like, oh, we're both alive on this same planet. And that can be a very profound thing for people to hear and think.
I think that was the great impact of the Humpback Whale album, 1970, that Roger Payne put forth, that touched the hearts of millions of people. I mean, I think it did more for whales than all of the books and talks and symposia put together. Because they heard something that touched what I think is a universal chord in the life family, and that's yearning. You hear that yearning blues kind of quality in not only most human cultures, but I hear it in all the creatures. And I love to imagine what's that yearning that we share with all these beings. And I think life is just yearning for connectedness and for more. Who knows? I mean, again, it's one of the mysteries, but that's where I found such kinship among the voices of this, what I call this greater symphony of the earth.
That's a good place to stop this segment. We're talking to Paul Winter. We're going to take a little break, and then we're going to come right back and talk a little bit more. All right, we're back. I have some people to thank. One of them is Dylan Reyes, the maestro, who is the technical producer of this. I believe Jonathan McPants will be jumping in and doing some work in post-production. I should tell you we're doing this roughly about a week before you're hearing it. And then Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Productions, headed by Lily Tyson, is the principal producer of this episode. So thanks to all of them. I am incredibly grateful for my team, as Paul is for the incredible people that he works with. Paul Winter is with us now. And by the way, if you go to our website, ctpublic.org/Colin, look up this episode and you can see, we'll have all the dates that Paul is playing, so you'll be able to figure out when you can get there, when you can hear the solstice thing, whether you can make it to the 29th and hear the kickoff at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. But speaking of that, and you know this story, I'm going to ask your indulgence a little bit, and I'll quickly try to tell it. So in 9/11, after 9/11, I was a journalist. I had to work really, really hard after 9/11, just telling that story both on radio and in writing. And I didn't take care of myself. And I got some kind of sickness in my soul in November of that year. And just the world felt so dark to me, and I couldn't shake it. And it was like I was in some kind of abyss where I couldn't feel the sides or find the edges to climb out. And I just have never felt that way before, since it was the most miserable feeling. And I didn't know that whether it would end. And it's the worst. That's the worst part of it. If you've ever been through something like this, I thought, I don't really know when this is going to end. And I sort of had lost track of time, but it was late December, and I was in New York, and I was visiting my friend Luann Rice, the writer, and she said, meet me at the Hungarian pastry shop in Morningside Heights, which I think it's actually called the Hungarian Pastry Shop, too.
It is.
I think it's great. So we met there, and I was just, once again, just miserable. And Luann knew what a mess I was. And then we just sort of on a whim walked across the street to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. This is in the late afternoon. And I walked into this cathedral, and I immediately felt better. I don't know why. So much so that I was pushing my hand up against the walls of it, thinking something is happening here. And then I took a walk down that little hallway a little bit, and there you were. And you were doing a sound check. You had your horn in your hand, as usual, and you were doing a sound check. And, we just had a little time to say hello to each other, because that was the kickoff that night of your solstice concert. And just seeing you there and hearing you just play a little bit for sound check and being in that cathedral, I walked out with Luann, and I thought, I don't feel exactly better, but I think I know I'm going to feel better.
Wow.
And I did. It took more weeks than that. But it was the first time in 6 weeks that I thought, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get over this somehow. I'm going to stop feeling this way. And I give some of it, you and I have known each other a long time. It was just great to unexpectedly see you there. I'd forgotten that the Solstice concert was there that night. But in Assault of that place, there's something about that building, Paul. Maybe it's just all the people who have poured so much of themselves into it.
Do you know, the Gothic cathedrals were designed throughout Europe on the same architectural principle of the golden section, which is the proportions of the human body.
Yeah.
And I've heard it said that those architects knew that a certain shape, a certain dimension of shape has an effect on the human spirit. Not just bigness. I mean, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine is the largest cathedral in the world, but it could also be a small cathedral in Holland or somewhere, and it might have the same effect. And I don't really understand why, and again, I don't need to.
Yeah.
I know that I feel better when I walk in the cathedral, and I've been doing this now for 46 years. And each time I realize, this is bigger than I can even remember. And I couldn't describe it enough to have it really be an adequate assessment of that place.
I think there's also, in their mission is this idea of connecting religion to creativity. There's a poet's corner, where things like that. And Philippe Petit, who we were talking about coming in from the parking lot, the man obviously was the man on wire at the old World Trade Center towers. You've worked with him there, like on the Solstice concerts. He is this other sort of beacon of pure creativity too, right? And I think he had like a residency there, or he was like the artist in residence.
He has been artist in residence, a fellow artist in residence since longer than I have.
Yeah.
We started in 1980, and he came up in the late 70s at some point when Jim Morton had just become the dean and did an illegal walk, like all his walks were illegal. And he had, this is after he'd done the World Trade Center, but, to get gigs as a high-wire artist, there's no agents that are going to do it. You just have to go in, sneak in, rig your cables, and do it and expect to be arrested immediately, which he was at the cathedral. He did that there. And at the point, the dean didn't know it was happening when it was, and the police had come, and they had arrested Philippe when he came down from the wire. And the dean then heard about what was going on. He raced over to the cathedral from the office next door and said to the police, "Take those handcuffs off. This man is an artist." And of course, he had the prerogative of that space. The police could not overrule him, so they did reluctantly. And from that time on, Philippe has been artist in residence, high-wire artist in residence, which I think every cathedral ought to have. They
ought to have a lot of the things that cathedral have. And we were talking about, he would, during a few of the Solstice concerts, he would kind of rappel down there somehow.
Yes, he did, yeah.
And, that sort of brings up you and Philippe, and I sort of barely remember this, but you and Philippe, we did a show about creativity, and you were nice enough to come on by phone, and I think Philippe came on by phone too. And the reason we did it was there's this woman I knew named Lisa who said that to me that she wasn't creative. She had no creativity. And so I decided, well, let's do a whole show with a bunch of creative people and Lisa to talk about that whole idea. Because I don't know about you, but, well, I do know because we did the show, but I don't really believe that when people say they're not creative. But how do you react to that statement when people say that?
There are a number of terms that we're, bedeviled by as we grow up that are problematic, that I like to imagine a semantic check room. And I said, let's check that word there. And if you want to get it someday, you can go get it. One of them is talent. I really don't agree with the idea that there's some people who have talent and other people don't. We each have a inclination towards different kinds of things. But I think that the key thing with regard to the creativity is license. And if enough people in your young journey say yes to you, yes, that's okay. You can draw anything you want, or you can play any sounds you want, you'll eventually, the creativity will come forth. Not everybody's going to be a professional musician, but the idea that you can have some satisfaction from creating sounds and even making them with other people is, I think, a gift. And I'd like everybody to know that they have that gift.
Yeah, and I think when people say that I'm not creative, they think that they need to do a thing. The creativity is doing a thing, which at some point it is, but I think it starts in a different place. And with you, it clearly starts in a different place. It starts with listening to what else is going on around you right now. And I feel like we're getting worse and worse about that as a species, the more we stick things into our ears and shut out everything else. But to me, creativity starts with looking and listening. You won't create anything interesting unless you have engaged with the world around you. And maybe that's a thing that I don't think schools exist to help people become creative for the most part. They exist to get people kind of functional within a certain order.
Sure. And over the years, we've done many music-making workshops called Adventures in Sound Play at universities, schools around the country in conjunction with our concerts. And I've always said to the kids, the school can teach you discipline, but you've got to learn freedom on your own. And the great thing about a school is it's community. So you've got all these acquaintances, hopefully friends, and maybe you can get together on your own and try some of this where nobody's watching, nobody's saying what's right or wrong. And with the sound play, we always do it in the dark. And it's absolutely amazing what shifts. When the lights are turned out, a whole world of imagination it comes forth that we don't visit it much because we mostly watch our way through life. So that's, to me, one of the simplest trick I know. Turn out the lights, make some sounds, and don't worry about it.
I love that idea. We were talking about jazz before the show started, and I do think that jazz musicians are great listeners because you absolutely have to listen to what everybody else is doing because they're going to be slipping little quotes from other songs in there, and you got to be able to respond to those two bars that you heard. I don't know. We're almost out of time here. Do you have any other advice to people about how to listen? Turn out the lights is a great place to start, I guess. But you're such a great listener.
Well, I mean, it's just being allured to various things. And I'm not sure how allurement happens. I think we all have it toward various things. And to get to follow that up and explore further is a gift. And I would think that the license to do that is one of the best gifts you can give yourself.
Yeah, I think some of it is just shutting off the thing that goes, oh, I've got to do something next. I've got to play next, or I've got to say something after Paul stops talking. So we get locked into that future moment when we have to do something, and we're not listening in the present moment. So some of it might be just stay right where you are in time.
Okay.
Yeah, don't get way ahead. Paul Winter, it's so much fun to see you again, and we have a plan every 13 years, so you'll be 99, and I don't know, I'll be 84, and we'll
Why not?
have another great conversation.
Yeah, we're just getting started.